The government of Georgian Dream is on a fast track of autocratic consolidation, and day by day is holding on to power. But this is not met without resistance, and we are seeing Georgian citizens mobilizing in streets against the regime. To discuss this, we invited experts at Dialogbüro to have a conversation of the situation on the ground, the path of autocratization, and how does this compare to the experiences of other countries which are experiencing similar democratic backsliding. We also talked about how does Georgian Dream manage to stay in power despite the fact that overwhelming majority of Georgians are in favor of European integration. And at the same time, what is the role and what can the European Union do to support democratic forces on the ground? In this video, which is a short summary of the discussion, our speakers will answer and address some of the key issues and questions on Georgia's democracy.
Yeah, what we are seeing now in Georgia is a real human rights and political crisis. Since 2022, especially, although certain authoritarian and illiberal tendencies were present before 2022, but especially since 2022, the ruling Georgian Dream Party has started to adopt several repressive laws. In 2023, the first attempt to adopt the foreign agent law, what was called by civil society Russian law, was withdrawn. But then in 2024, they did adopt that law with a minor change, and they also adopted repressive anti-LGBTQI legislation. They adopted legislation to further limit the freedom of assembly, for example, increasing the fines for protesters. And finally, after the manipulated elections in October, in November, the Prime Minister declared that the Georgian Dream is no longer seeking to open accession negotiations with the EU until 2028. And this brought hundreds of thousands of Georgians to the streets, also in smaller towns and villages even. It was really a very diverse and large protest, probably the largest since Georgia regained independence from the Soviet Union. And the ruling party cracked down on that protest brutally, first with brute force and police violence, and later with the force of the law. And thousands of people have been fined for participating in protests, and over 50 persons are imprisoned right now, including one journalist, our partner, Mzia Marlobeli. And overall, what we see is that the situation in the country has deteriorated rapidly. The conditions for civil society work have deteriorated rapidly, and yet the Georgian Dream remains in power. And we do not know what the future of Georgian civil society, but also Georgia's European integration will look like, and whether there will be one.
Georgia is at the crossroad, and so are many other countries. The role of the youth in Georgia's resistance movement has been central. And what we are witnessing nowadays is not just a contradiction to one legislation or a law, but rather a awakening of political consciousness, especially amongst the youth of Georgia, who have been seen rather apolitical or disengaged from political processes before. But nowadays, within this resistance movement, the Georgian youth are transforming from a passive spectators to active architects of the Georgian political future. And they are doing this with emotional and close engagement with Europe and with the idea of Europe. So the resistance movement is rather characterized as a civic education where Georgian youth are imagining Georgian society in rather inclusive terms, as pluralistic, as diverse and democratic, the place of which should be in Europe. So while the youth are redefining their identity in European terms and imagining European Georgia, the political elite, governing elites are at the same time changing the very meaning of Europe and Georgia's association with the West in a more exclusionary and authoritarian ways. I think this is the tendency that will continue to form Georgia's coming political discussions and contestations in the country.
So when we're talking about Georgia and its history of transformation into the kind of regime we have now, it all started in 2012 when the Georgian Dream won competitive elections, and therefore there was a promise of transforming what most of the people referred to as a facade democracy into a real functioning competitive democracy. But the things didn't really develop this way. The Georgian Dream, which at that point was a coalition of several smaller parties, some of them with a clearly pro-Western stance, has, with the fullness of time, transformed itself. It has shed the parties that were mostly pro-Western, and that this process has ended around 2018-2019. And during this process, the leader of the party, Ivanishvili, has proceeded to capture the state. This meant appointing of the loyal persons to the government positions, but also importantly to the independent agencies and the courts. So as we came to 2022, approximately most of the state institutions were captured. 2022, of course, 2021-22, is the start of the new hostilities in Ukraine, the Russian invasion shortly afterwards in 2022, and this is when the captured institutions try to start to really reveal themselves. And the first element of that was the introduction of so-called Russian law, or the law on transparency of foreign funding, which was intending to suppress civil society organizations and the media. First attempt was unsuccessful, but this law was reintroduced and pushed through by the government. This was accompanied by immense pressure on the political opponents and on civil society activists and media representatives. So as we stand here now, the regime has not only consolidated power, not only has it captured the state, but has gone very far towards suppressing the opponents. Now, 6 opposition figures are in prison. There is a parliament commission, so-called Soliciting commission, that is working, which is supposed to render its final verdict in August. And the intended verdict that was mentioned by its leader was to actually ban the United National Movement and all parties which the Georgian Dream says are affiliated with it, which by now includes all of the parties that have participated in last elections in 2024. Those elections, of course, were pivotal because not only has the Georgian Dream rigged them to a massive scale, but also immediately afterwards, the government said that they were suspending the association with the European Union, something that led to massive protests and equally massive repression.
Exclusionary politics, mainly manufactured by the ruling party, are aggregating as well. What used to be a signature of the fringe political parties, so national populist discourses and exclusionary discourses, are now becoming mainstream. And in this sense, nationalism is not just about sovereignty or pride, but how exclusionary nationalism is used nowadays is defining who can or belongs to Georgian society, so who is a good Georgian and who is not. And this is used as an instrument to exclude some parts of society from the public space. And this national populist discourse is used to also create or imagine enemies, both within the country and outside of the country. And of course, all these transformations and strategies of instrumentalizing national populism should also be seen in the wider global context. In Georgian context, what is important is that these global illiberal discourses are adapted to the post-Soviet vulnerabilities and specific type of nationalism, the religious nationalism there.
We all see from the polls that Georgians are still overwhelmingly supporting the European integration. Yet the question, of course, is how does the GD manage to secure electoral victories against the background of their anti-European propaganda? There are several answers to this question. Firstly, there is weaponization of social assistance. Through the time when Georgian Dream is in power, 300,000 people have been put on the payroll of the social support system. And in the past elections, the Georgian Dream used these lists to pressure people, basically, to tell them that they will lose this assistance unless they vote for them. The second is the use of the administrative resources and the resources of the security apparatus. We know from the last elections that the databases of people who are in prison, people who have debts, etc., have been used again for pressuring individual voters, for telling them that if they vote for them, then these people would be released or receive easier sentences, or if they do not vote for them, these sentences will be aggravated. This is, of course, would have been impossible if the Georgian Dream was not capturing the state completely and all of its institutions. And lastly, of course, there is the simple mechanics of running the election day. We have seen a very sophisticated system through which not only this pressure was exercised before the elections, but also on the election day, there was a way to check how people were voting. And the combination of that on the election day has led to this massive vote swing towards the Georgian Dream, which was differing from the polls.
Actually, by now and for now, the Kremlin has achieved all its goals in Georgia, because its two major goals were to prevent Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration and to keep it in its so-called sphere of influence, but also to undermine Georgia's democratic transition. And unfortunately, both goals have been achieved, because despite the ruling party's claims to the contrary, their policy very much contradicts Georgia's European and Euro-Atlantic integration. And their domestic politics and policies are straight from the Kremlin's playbook of undermining civil society, human rights, and also profiting de facto the ruling party and its affiliated businessmen de facto profiting from Russia's war against Ukraine economically. The European Union has acted too little, too late, and we keep hearing statements from diplomats, for example, saying that, we don't understand what happened in Georgia because just a year ago we granted them EU candidacy, and the government apparently or seemingly sought EU integration, and we don't understand why this happened and what happened. But actually, I think if you look back in history, the authoritarian and illiberal tendencies of the Georgian Dream were there for many years, and at the same time, it is true that we have seen an acceleration of them and of Georgia's autocratization since 2023, especially. And then actually the European Union, had to make a difficult decision about whether to grant Georgia candidate status, despite the democratic backsliding that we saw or not. But the decision was made to grant candidate status, also as an offer and to the population, which is overwhelmingly pro-European, and in order to keep the door open for Georgia to and for the Georgian society to return to this path of European integration later. And we also see that the European Union has taken quite a clear position on the autocratization that Georgia has taken. But in terms of actual political measures, the EU has been rather weak, and most of the measures it has implemented outside of accession conditionality have been rather symbolic, and this is because of the undermining of a strong European position by Hungary, Slovakia, and even a couple of other member states who are closely aligned with the Georgian Dream and support and themselves pursue a anti-democratic and pro-Russian policy.
How does the Georgian Dream regime compare to other countries? I would say that the processes that were happening up to this moment are very similar to what we have seen, for example, in Serbia or earlier in Hungary, when a political party arrives to power and then gradually treads the authoritarian path by reducing the opposition, attacking the media, and trying to close up the civil space. The key difference is that Georgia is not as close to the European Union, both geographically and in terms of political affiliation, as Serbia and especially Hungary are. So therefore, the push factors, so to say, of them treading more carefully are simply not there. As we know, the Vučić regime, for example, refrained from the physical attack on demonstrators during very massive protests in the country. Bidzina Ivanishvili didn't feel that he was checked by the external pressure to the same extent. So one would say, therefore, that while Georgia is very similar to some of the Eastern European and accession countries, it is significantly different in a way that there are much weaker checks and balances right now on Ivanishvili's regime. What is important to say is that because of this lack of checks and because of very weak reaction of the European Union, now the ruling party feels that they can go further. And in recent days and weeks, we have seen how that is manifesting itself not only through the purges of the opposition and attacks on civil society, but on purges within the party, which serve only to consolidate the power of Bidzina Ivanishvili further.
So these political transformations should, of course, be seen in the larger context, and especially in the context of the global far-right and illiberal turn. In Georgian context, the West has been seen as a symbol of modernity, a symbol of democracy and progressive ideas for a long while. But now this picture is fractured. And the ruling elites are also trying to change the meaning of what West means and where Georgia actually belongs to. And of course, the governing elites are tapping into this global far-right and illiberal tendency as well by adapting rejection of multiculturalism or institutional constraints. But it of course also has a distinct Georgian flavor, adapting these illiberal narratives to the local context, to post-Soviet trauma and vulnerabilities, as well as the specific type of nationalism and nationalist discourses there. And this shift is also very interesting and particular in Georgian case, whereas there is no obvious anti-Westernism declared, but rather a strategic de-Westernization, which means to reject the values that have been associated with the liberal democratic order of the West, but still instrumentalize and use the benefits that come with EU alignment.